Hello and welcome back. It's a beautiful day here in the nation's capital, and yes, you're listening to Tim Talk Talk. As you all know from the name of the game, I'm Tim, and I'm here to talk with you all about anything and everything in our world today. This morning, we're going to be kicking things off by talking about the importance of sustainability. But not just sustainability in general, because, as many of you know from previous shows, that could fill a whole episode and more. No, today instead, I'm going to be specifically sharing with you all a story of innovation in sustainability. What do I mean by innovation, you might ask? Well, to many, if not most, the term innovation most likely conjures images of inventors, feats of technology, and dreams of the future, such as flying cars and the like. I don't mean that facetiously. In fact, I mean quite the opposite. There obviously have been countless remarkable, innovative accomplishments thanks to incredible human minds, hard work, and the ever-growing capabilities of technology. These sort of achievements have brought great strides in addressing the reality of global climate change and in planning for a better, more sustainable future. For example, electric cars, rooftop solar panels, cogeneration power plants, clean cook stoves, the list goes on and on. But what I'm talking about today approaches innovation from a slightly different perspective. Defined literally, innovation means a sort of revolutionary breakthrough, essentially a new method or product, even a new way of thinking or just an idea. That's exactly the point I'm making today. While I certainly cannot claim to be the only one that have ever thought along the lines of what I'm about to get into, I do consider this project I've been working on to be a very important, albeit maybe atypical, form of innovation in the realm of sustainability. Let me start by reading a quote from a study published in 2000, which I hope helps set the stage for what I consider to be the stakes of the project, so to speak. The article is titled Risks of Communication: Discourses on Climate Change in Science, Politics, and the Mass Media. It's by Weinhardt, Engels, and Pansero. The authors say how the mass media cover scientific subjects matters in many ways. Whether scientists like it or not, stem cells, genetically modified organisms, cloning, whatever the subject, media coverage has helped to shape public perception and through it affected how science is translated into policy. In other words, in this day and age, the media is the mechanism by which the vast majority of us inform our opinions and get a sense of what's happening, not only in our own backyard, but also in far corners of the globe we would never reach. Ultimately, the media, and for many people that means major popular television news networks, shape our perspectives, thinking, and thus actions about major issues and problems. Climate change is no exception. In fact, not only is it not an exception, I would argue it is in fact a case-in-point example of this phenomenon. How often and in which way these media outlets portray the matter of global climate change inevitably affects how we think about this issue and accordingly act or don't act in regard to addressing it. So, for my project, I took a first-hand look at this relationship. This is the story of that project. I asked the questions, what, if any, variations are there in the amount and type of mass media coverage of anthropogenic climate change, sometimes dubbed simply as global warming, and what might be the implications of this variation or lack thereof? Using the database NexusUni, formerly known as LexisNexis Academic, I examined the broadcast transcripts from 6 major television news networks, which contained the terms either climate change or global warming or both. I chose CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, and NBC specifically because they are commonly regarded as the most prominent cable news networks and broadcast news networks, respectively. When it gets down to the meat and potatoes of the data analysis, the work was twofold, both quantitative and qualitative. The quantitative component, that is, considering the amount of coverage for each network, is helpful because it helps to understand which networks are discussing climate change or global warming most frequently or least frequently. This itself is worthwhile because it is no secret that the more the media talks about something, the more its audience is talking about it and thinking about it, which in turn is connected to how important they view it. This analysis was done by counting the total number of broadcast segments which mentioned climate change or global warming at least once and aired on one of the 6 networks during the 3-month period. The qualitative component of my data analysis involved a technique known as coding. This sort of coding is different from the coding some of you might be familiar with for computer programming. Coding in this context refers to the process of tracking the transcripts containing the highlighted segments covering climate change and/or global warming in some form, and then categorizing them after getting a sense of their qualitative context by reading through their content. The categories I decided to use to group the coverage were positive, negative, and neutral. Positive doesn't mean that the network is being the bearer of good news regarding climate change. Rather, positive coverage is meant to signify that the coverage is consistent with the vast consensus in the scientific community regarding climate change. In other words, for purposes of this project, positive coverage is that which is definitively conveying any combination of the following factors: that global warming is occurring, that it is anthropogenic or due to human causes, and that it has widespread consequences not only worth addressing, but also certainly in need of addressing. It can also be a critique of climate deniers or unsubstantiated criticisms of anthropogenic climate change. Getting back to the original point, oftentimes positive coverage can indeed be good news, so to speak, if it's reporting on an important breakthrough that helps the world's efforts in facing climate change, for example. However, it can also frequently be bad news, that is, like a condemning news report regarding the current state of affairs concerning climate change. Ultimately, the coding term positive is rooted in the definition that positive can be something having an affirmative and constructive quality or attribute. Negative coverage, on the other hand, was defined for this project as the opposite of either one or both of the factors for the positive characterization. Negative coverage also includes that which affords false equivalence to climate change skeptics or deniers, whether intentional or not. Lastly, neutral coverage included elements of both positive and negative coverage simultaneously, thus having a net neutral impact, that is, being neither affirmative or constructive nor detrimental per se. Neutral coverage also included that which simply had no significant say or bearing on climate change one way or the other, beyond just an inconsequential reference to the phenomenon, at least inconsequential as it pertains to whether or not the coverage is constructive to expressing the anthropogenic nature of climate change and its significance. This sort of neutral coverage was often that which was a casual offhand mention in a political discussion of sorts. So, with that background of my methods and reasoning out of the way, let's get into a brief overview of my results. From my research, I found that on average, cable news networks aired more coverage of climate change and global warming than did broadcast news networks, CNN especially. CNN aired 181 total news segments on the topic during the 3-month period, which constituted a whopping 56% of all the 6 networks' coverage combined, as there were 323 total news segments. That's a remarkable amount of coverage for CNN, more than 3 times the amount of coverage than even the network with the second most coverage, Fox News. It makes sense that cable news networks would make up the vast majority of coverage during the 3 months, 84% of all coverage to be exact, because cable news networks air news coverage 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but broadcast news networks, on the other hand, have other types of programming. The trend was different when it came to the type of coverage instead of just the amount, however. The broadcast news networks, that is ABC, CBS, and NBC, had significantly greater proportions of their coverage of climate change and global warming be positive in nature. In fact, the large majority of their coverage was positive. NBC led the way with more than 87% of its coverage being positive. ABC and CBS were well over 50% themselves, with 71.4% and 68.5% respectively. On the cable news side of things, CNN and MSNBC didn't even break 50% when it came to the proportions of their coverage that were positive. The majority of these two networks' coverage was neutral. Fox News had by far the least positive coverage, at only 7%, and also the most negative, with 47.4%. Interestingly, only CNN and CBS aired any coverage at all that could be considered negative, in addition to Fox News, each with only 1 total negative segment. The remaining 3 other networks didn't air any negative coverage at all. This adds further significance to the fact that Fox News aired 27 out of a total 57 segments. That means, for all of the negative coverage between the 6 networks for the 3 months, Fox News made up more than 93%. All in all, these findings reinforce the notion that, of course, no two media outlets are alike. While cable news networks tend to talk about climate change and global warming the most, much more of their coverage is neutral than positive, or even negative than positive in the case of Fox News, especially when compared to broadcast networks, who, although in smaller quantities, have much more positive coverage, that is, affirmative and constructive coverage when it comes to the matter of climate change and global warming. The stakes of these findings are clear, and in fact offer a challenge of sorts. We need to not only be more aware about the media we're consuming, but also more conscious of what others might be consuming. Having a healthy and meaningful dialogue on the issues of sustainability and climate change is of course necessary to having meaningful action, but there are clearly challenges to accomplishing that when there are different pictures being painted for different groups and audiences. I would say that being able to see and understand these effects in a project like mine is certainly an innovation in the field of sustainability. I hope that I didn't lose you all by getting into some of those nitty-gritty details, but if you want to learn more about it, let me know, because I'm writing a paper on not only what I covered today, but also even more in-depth analysis of all of the findings of my project, with some very nice, very colorful, and hopefully even more readily understood graphics, so I can send it along to you to read if you'd like. Well, anyway, that's it on the subject for now. We're going to be getting into the music portion of the show in a moment, so please stay tuned.